Welcome to the MadHuman channel, and tonight, we step quietly into shadowed corridors, farther than memory, deeper than fear, and into something far more forbidden than history itself. Tonight, we follow the story of humanity's experiments, the ones meant to be forgotten, buried beneath layers of silence, whispers, and carefully erased documents. These are not just experiments of science or curiosity. They are experiments of morality, of ambition, of what it means to touch the unknown and live to tell, or not to tell, the tale. Because these experiments are not simply events of the past. They are pulses in the body of civilization. They ripple, echo, and linger. And long after the institutions and names have vanished, their consequences remain, flowing through human memory, shaping thought, shadowing decisions. Before governments had codes, before ethics had forms, before conscience was polished by philosophy, there were hands reaching, minds calculating, and ambitions unchecked. Before humanity had learned restraint, before curiosity could be tempered by caution, there were those who tested limits others were too afraid to approach. They did not need permission to begin. They simply began. It came in whispers, in midnight notes, in laboratories hidden beneath mountains, in abandoned buildings where walls themselves seemed complicit in secrecy. And the world, unknowing, received it. The way a forest receives a storm, the way a mind receives an idea it cannot yet understand. Slowly, endlessly, patiently, these experiments became humanity's hidden memory, a record written in shadows. The first experiments weren't clean. They weren't careful. They were raw. They pushed flesh and thought, curiosity and cruelty, to edges that were uncharted and, often, unlawful. Some began with substances unknown to common understanding, chemical reactions that twisted perception, cells that were never meant to be merged, energies that should have remained theoretical. They took what nature had made sacred and dissected it. Life wasn't always understood in theory. It was observed in real time, often without consent, and always with the assumption that consequences could be controlled. And yet, chaos has a way of speaking louder than ambition. The laboratories never needed fame. They existed in silence. That was enough. Scientists, some brilliant, some reckless, some desperately curious, wrote in journals that were never published, recorded in logs that were never read, and observed in corridors no one would walk. They mixed chemicals, injected unknown compounds, altered genes, and measured human responses not by morality, but by numbers. And when humanity wasn't ready, truly ready, the consequences arrived anyway. They escaped not to harm deliberately, but to explore possibility. Experiments meant to be confined spread into society quietly. Altered organisms, new diseases, behavioral manipulations, and glimpses into human consciousness that were never meant to be touched. And even now, centuries later, their echoes remain. You are walking among the results of what was once hidden. And even as institutions documented, redacted, and reclassified, the memory of these forbidden experiments stayed. It pulsed in the shadows of society. It rippled through forgotten archives. It whispered in the corridors of abandoned laboratories. It called to those curious enough to notice, in the sudden breakthrough, in the inexplicable anomaly, in the stories never printed in newspapers but passed quietly from one mind to another. The experiments did not punish the world for discovering them. They watched, they followed, they altered perception, behavior, and sometimes the very genetic structures of those unknowingly involved. Wherever they went, they shaped society, science, and morality, not as witnesses but as hidden architects of human understanding. The cities that now host the brightest lights of progress were once arenas for silent observation, where experiments unfolded under cover of night, cloaked in bureaucracy and authority. Their hallways still hold traces of those tests, not just physical traces but moral ones. Every policy formed, every law debated, every medical advancement carries within it some hidden lesson borrowed from experiments the world was never supposed to remember. The architects of those experiments understood patience. They understood concealment. They carved pathways into human history that would not be visible until decades, sometimes centuries later. And humans, when they arrived into the post-experimental world, were unwitting participants in a story they had not consented to, yet one that shaped their very being. Early humans did not understand the concept of being tested without knowing it. They could not recognize that some paths were paved by unseen manipulation, that some discoveries were accelerated by clandestine study. But slowly, imperceptibly, these experiments influenced what would become culture, policy, and knowledge. Entire communities, unknowingly, became living laboratories, their reactions recorded, their behaviors noted, their fates documented in invisible ink across the margins of science. Humanity survived. It evolved. It forgot. But the memory, like water carving stone, remained beneath the surface. And still the experiments continued. They did not ask for recognition. They did not seek validation. They existed in hidden notebooks, in rooms beneath concrete, in vaults that no ordinary citizen could open. From testing human endurance to manipulating perception, from chemical exposure to psychological observation, they connected the seemingly separate threads of science and secrecy. And when they were finally exposed, often decades later, society would gasp, rewind, and attempt to reckon with what had been done. But even exposure could not erase the impact. The experiments were history, quietly embedded in the cells, minds, and societies of humanity. It was the experiments that taught humanity about itself, not in the ethics books, not in public lectures, but in observation of extremes. They revealed bravery and cowardice, cruelty and resilience, innovation and recklessness. They demonstrated what humans are capable of when curiosity outruns morality. Entire disciplines were shaped by their existence, even when their names were removed from the record. And across time, as knowledge expanded, as technology advanced, humanity continued to flirt with the forbidden, always balancing the quest for understanding with the risk of repeating the mistakes of the shadows. And across decades, empires, and ideologies, the experiments never truly stopped. They simply adapted. They moved from chemical labs to digital simulations, from cellular manipulation to artificial intelligence, from behavioral observation to neurochemical influence. They traveled with humanity into every corner of the globe, hidden in plain sight, present in ways most could never recognize. They flowed through research, policy, and ambition like water through stone. And humanity, in its insatiable curiosity, continued to reach for the edges, even as the echoes of forgotten experiments waited quietly, watching, reminding, and sometimes punishing. Because the experiments were never just about science. They were about understanding limits, human, ethical, and cosmic. And in that understanding, they carved a memory we cannot fully erase. They exist in our laws, our ethics, our failures, and our triumphs. And even when society turns away, even when history ignores them, even when the laboratories are torn down or abandoned, the results remain. They are part of who we are, a hidden legacy flowing beneath every surface, a reminder of curiosity untempered, a whisper of what happens when humanity reaches for what it was never meant to touch. The experiments were never merely scientific exercises. They were ethical mirrors held up to humanity's face, reflecting ambitions that dared to exceed compassion. In hidden rooms, where fluorescent lights flickered with sterile indifference, human behavior was dissected. Minds were prodded, memories manipulated, fears intensified, and loyalties tested. Every reaction, every hesitation, every impulse became data, recorded and analyzed with a precision that defied empathy. The subjects, whether willing or unwilling, were rarely given the comfort of understanding. And yet, in that darkness, humanity's unspoken nature emerged, revealing instincts buried beneath society's veneer of civility, exposing the raw, unfiltered pulse of desire, obedience, and curiosity. Across continents, the experiments took shape in forms both subtle and shocking. Some involved the very essence of life. Viruses designed to test resistance, genetic sequences altered in isolation, and chemicals that whispered promises of brilliance while sowing the seeds of devastation. Others probed consciousness itself, measuring thought, perception, and memory under conditions that would later be considered unconscionable. No name was printed, no story told. The work was catalogued in secrecy, spread across time and geography, each fragment hidden from the public eye yet profoundly shaping the trajectory of discovery. And in the shadows of these experiments, the architects of control observed not only the results but the humanity they sought to understand, and sometimes to manipulate. Some experiments tested boundaries beyond flesh and mind. Mechanical simulations, artificial intelligence designed to predict human behavior, algorithms trained on data gleaned from unknowing populations. All of these were modern extensions of the old work. Ethics committees were written into law precisely to restrain ambition, yet even as frameworks arose, the experimenters adapted, finding loopholes, redefining consent, and discovering new ways to probe the limits of comprehension. It was a quiet evolution, invisible to those outside the walls of the laboratories, and yet inescapable for the minds and bodies under observation. Humanity itself became a living laboratory, the sum of choices, reactions, and vulnerabilities measured and catalogued in invisible ink across decades of clandestine study. The most chilling experiments were those that targeted the mind. They exploited fear, desire, loyalty, and memory, not just as curiosities, but as tools of influence. Sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, induced hallucinations, and memory erasure were not theoretical exercises. They were practiced in cold precision, often justified in the name of progress. And the consequences extended beyond the laboratory. Those who emerged from such studies carried with them altered perceptions, fragmented memories, and a quiet sense of dislocation, a legacy invisible to anyone who had not witnessed the work firsthand. These invisible scars were the quiet, enduring fingerprints of experiments never meant to be remembered. And yet, there was an artistry to the design of these clandestine studies. They were methodical in scope, meticulous in planning, executed with an almost obsessive patience. They were experiments that unfolded over years, sometimes decades, with a subtlety that allowed the participants to remain unaware while the observers collected data on every facet of human experience. Social interactions were monitored, choices catalogued, and reactions predicted. In some cases, entire communities became living subjects, their behaviors measured under varying conditions of scarcity, risk, and reward. The results, though hidden, shaped everything: policy, culture, technology, even the boundaries of science itself. In laboratories beneath crumbling cities, inside research facilities guarded by bureaucracy and secrecy, Some experiments straddled the line between genius and atrocity. They probed the very fabric of life. Embryonic development, gene expression, neural pathways, and disease progression were all subjected to observation under controlled yet ethically ambiguous conditions. Compounds were administered, cells observed, and outcomes recorded with a precision that left no room for error, but also often no room for mercy. These laboratories existed as paradoxes, at once temples of knowledge and chambers of quiet suffering. The discoveries made there would ripple across decades, influencing medicine, psychology, and human understanding. Yet the human cost remained largely invisible, a silent ledger of what was lost to ambition. Even when the physical traces of these experiments vanished, labs demolished, papers shredded, participants scattered, the imprint remained. Ideas persisted, quietly influencing science, engineering, and philosophy. Algorithms and techniques born in secrecy were later applied openly, reshaping society in ways the architects of the experiments could scarcely have imagined. And the humans involved, knowingly or unknowingly, carried the imprint of these experiments within themselves. Altered behaviors, heightened awareness, or simply an ineffable sense of having been observed. Memory, it seemed, cannot be entirely erased. Not from cells, not from consciousness, not from the collective hum of civilization. And it is here, in the liminal space between observation and consequence, that the true power of the experiments emerges. They did not merely reveal what humanity could do, they revealed what humanity might become when morality is weighed against curiosity, when ambition exceeds caution, and when knowledge is sought without accountability. Entire generations of scientists, philosophers, and policymakers have, knowingly or unknowingly, traced their steps along paths first blazed in secret, their choices informed by data and precedents no one else could see. It is a hidden scaffolding of influence, a subterranean architecture of human experience that shapes the present while remaining largely unacknowledged. Some of the experiments were designed to test endurance. How much pain could the body tolerate? How long the mind could remain coherent? How stress altered judgment, memory, and morality? Others tested the boundaries of social organization. Communities subjected to scarcity, isolation, or conflicting information, all observed to understand conformity, rebellion, and leadership. Each experiment, no matter how small, carried the potential for profound insight or profound harm. And often it carried both simultaneously. The quiet genius of the observers was matched only by the silent suffering of the observed, a balance struck in the shadows where the world's attention could not reach. In the corridors of history, these experiments echo not merely as cautionary tales, but as reminders of human ambition untempered by foresight. They are lessons in restraint, patience, and moral reflection, if only we are willing to see them. And in the modern age, their legacy persists, often disguised as innovation, adaptation, or necessity. Behavioral economics, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, social modeling, all carry within them the quiet inheritance of experiments never meant to be remembered. These invisible threads wind through every interaction, every technological advance, every policy decision, quietly shaping what it means to be human. Somewhere, in a forgotten archive or a hidden database, the results of these studies remain, waiting for eyes that may never come. They hold knowledge but also warning, a reminder that human curiosity is boundless, but human oversight is fallible. That ambition without conscience, precision without empathy, and knowledge without restraint can yield discoveries, yes, but at a cost. And as civilization marches forward, ever hungry for innovation, the echoes of these forgotten experiments whisper in the periphery, reminding us that the pursuit of understanding is never neutral. It always carries with it consequences, sometimes seen, sometimes hidden, and always persistent. The experiments humanity was never supposed to remember were not just aberrations. They were reflections of the eternal tension between curiosity and morality. And that tension remains. In every laboratory, in every research facility, in every mind that dares to push boundaries, it waits quietly, urging caution even as it inspires progress. For in the pursuit of knowledge, in the act of experimentation, humanity must always grapple with its own shadow, the part that seeks, tests, and discovers, and the part that fears, restrains, and remembers. The shadow of these experiments is not confined to laboratories or secret bunkers. It extends into the streets, schools, hospitals, and homes where unsuspecting participants live out the consequences of actions taken decades, or even centuries ago. Humanity, in its unrelenting drive for progress, has carried forward the data, the principles, and sometimes the mistakes of experiments that were meant to vanish. We walk in worlds partially sculpted by knowledge acquired in darkness, our understanding of biology, behavior, and society deeply influenced by methods the public was never meant to witness. And yet, there is a quiet poetry in this hidden lineage. It is a story of curiosity, ambition, and caution interwoven, reminding us that the path to discovery is rarely straight, never simple, and always morally entangled. Some experiments were designed not to create knowledge but to test obedience, loyalty, and the limits of human compliance. Hidden cameras, unmarked rooms, and whispered instructions observed how individuals reacted to authority, pressure, and fear. Every hesitation, every act of defiance, every small compliance was recorded as a thread in a vast tapestry of human behavior. The researchers never sought notoriety. They operated in silence, careful to shield their work from scrutiny. Yet in doing so, they created a mirror that reflected humanity in its rawest form, a reflection both beautiful in its resilience and terrifying in its susceptibility to manipulation. The results of these social experiments became guides, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, for future policymakers, educators, and technologists. Other experiments were darker still, venturing into realms that challenge morality itself. Genetic manipulation, psychological conditioning, and chemical interventions were applied to individuals with varying degrees of consent, or none at all. They were tested not merely for survival or strength, but for susceptibility to influence, capacity for endurance, and malleability of thought. And though the public record may never reflect these acts, their echoes persist in the very fabric of modern science. Every discovery in pharmacology, neurology, and behavioral science carries within it fragments of clandestine inquiry, often without acknowledgement, often without moral reconciliation. The quiet weight of these unremembered experiments rests invisibly on the shoulders of progress. Some of the most insidious studies were designed to understand fear, obedience, and moral compromise. Volunteers or unwitting participants were subjected to scenarios that tested their willingness to harm others, to follow orders blindly, or to choose between personal safety and collective consequence. The lessons learned were etched into textbooks only decades later, sanitized and abstracted, leaving the human cost invisible to the general eye. Yet those who lived through the experiments bore the consequences in subtle ways. Changes in perception, lingering trauma, altered trust, and a quiet awareness that the world contains forces beyond ordinary comprehension. And though society often celebrated the knowledge gained, it rarely recognized the invisible debts paid in silence, in tears, in enduring unease. In parallel, other experiments pushed the boundaries of biology, medicine, and the very definition of life. Viruses, bacteria, and chemical compounds were tested under controlled but ethically ambiguous conditions. Cells were spliced, animals altered, and the lines between natural and synthetic blurred. Some studies aimed to create resilience, some to measure vulnerability, and some to explore possibilities that society might never consciously accept. Yet the results, though often classified, have influenced everything from modern medicine to public health policy. Humanity has benefited from knowledge extracted under questionable circumstances, a paradox that complicates our understanding of ethics, progress, and responsibility. And there were experiments of perception and mind, exploring not just what humans could do but what they could feel, believe, and imagine. Hallucinations induced under chemical influence, sensory deprivation, memory manipulation, and sleep interruption all revealed vulnerabilities and capacities previously hidden. Researchers documented patterns of cognition, emotional response, and decision-making, often in ways that participants themselves could never fully articulate. These insights, though sometimes applied in positive contexts later, were born from secrecy, from exploitation, and from a willingness to navigate moral gray zones that most societies would never condone openly. Despite the darkness, there is an undeniable brilliance in the scope and ambition of these experiments. They reflect the lengths to which humanity will go to understand itself, to map the contours of possibility, and to push boundaries beyond the visible. Yet brilliance and darkness are inseparable here, twin threads running through every hidden corridor of inquiry. The experiments do not forgive ignorance. They do not absolve curiosity untempered by ethics. They remain as reminders that every act of seeking knowledge carries weight, and that discovery divorced from responsibility can leave shadows across generations. Even the act of recording the experiments became an art in secrecy. Notes were encrypted, laboratories hidden in remote locations, participants' identities masked, and archives buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and obfuscation. The very methods of documentation reveal as much about human psychology as the experiments themselves. Those who conducted the studies understood the importance of control, not merely of variables within the experiment but of perception outside it. History, they knew, was malleable. Memory could be curated. And so they curated it, leaving only fragments, hints, and whispers for future generations to uncover, interpret, and confront. Some experiments have never been acknowledged at all, existing only in whispered rumors, oral accounts, and fragments of documents so heavily redacted they are unrecognizable. Entire narratives have been buried deliberately, erased from textbooks, and removed from public consciousness. And yet, the traces persist, like echoes in a canyon that refuses to be silent. Individuals continue to encounter the results unknowingly, in altered societal norms, technological applications, or subtle behavioral cues. Humanity has unknowingly absorbed lessons, mistakes, and consequences born of actions it was never meant to witness. The past, it seems, cannot be entirely hidden. The human capacity for curiosity, resilience, and observation is mirrored in these experiments. Every ethical violation, every triumph of innovation, every hidden discovery is part of the same continuum, a testament to humanity's ability to create, to destroy, and to endure. And while the consequences are often invisible, they are no less real. They shape society in ways both profound and subtle, informing policy, ethics, and the trajectory of scientific inquiry. In the shadows of these forgotten experiments, humanity confronts its own capacity for both brilliance and horror, for both ingenuity and cruelty, often simultaneously. Yet there is a lesson that remains, quiet but persistent. The experiments remind us that knowledge is never neutral. Every advance comes with responsibility, every curiosity with consequence. They teach that the pursuit of understanding is inseparable from ethical reflection, that ambition untempered by conscience can yield both marvel and tragedy. And perhaps most importantly, they reveal that memory itself is a living entity, capable of hiding, shaping, and returning at unexpected moments, demanding reckoning long after the initial act has passed. Somewhere, in the quiet halls of forgotten laboratories, in the sealed files of governments, in the encrypted databases of corporations, the full scope of humanity's experiments waits to be understood. And even if complete understanding is impossible, the partial glimpses we have already glimpsed are enough to shake assumptions, challenge complacency, and force reflection. For the experiments we were never meant to remember are not just historical footnotes. They are mirrors, warnings, and guides, reflecting both what humanity has been and what it might yet become. They reveal that curiosity is a river, unstoppable, flowing through every era, carrying both light and shadow. And as long as humanity exists, there will be those who reach into the unknown, who push boundaries, who conduct experiments not for fame, not for recognition, but simply because the unknown calls them forward. And in doing so, they leave behind a hidden inheritance, one that all of us inherit, whether we know it or not. The story of these experiments is not complete, for it is still unfolding. Secrets buried in the past resurface in new technologies, new social experiments, and new medical discoveries. Ethical dilemmas recur as the same questions emerge in novel forms. And while some lessons are learned, others are repeated, showing the cyclical nature of human ambition and oversight. Humanity carries forward the weight of its own curiosity, the unseen results of experiments designed to stretch the limits of knowledge and morality. In every laboratory, in every classroom, in every home where science quietly unfolds, the echoes of these experiments resonate. They remind us that knowledge carries responsibility, that curiosity carries consequence, and that what is hidden can shape reality as profoundly as what is visible. And as we walk through the world, unaware of the invisible scaffolding built by those who tested the boundaries before us, we must remember, the past is never fully gone. It waits, quietly, in the shadows, in the cells, in the minds of those who dare to look, asking us to witness, reflect, and learn. The experiments humanity was never supposed to remember are not merely about secrecy. They are about understanding, morality, and the fragile balance between ambition and restraint. They are about humanity itself, in all its brilliance, terror, and unyielding drive to reach beyond the known. And as long as we continue to ask questions, to explore, to experiment, and to create, the story continues, unseen yet persistent, waiting for recognition, reflection, and reckoning. The experiments humanity was never supposed to remember extend beyond laboratories, beyond governments, beyond official archives. They exist in whispers passed between those who survived, in the quiet nods of scientists who learned too much too young, in the fragmented diaries and encrypted files that refuse to disappear completely. They are the hidden scaffolding of human knowledge, the subterranean foundation upon which much of our visible world rests. And yet, despite their influence, their existence is often denied, minimized, or deliberately forgotten. Society prefers clean narratives, discoveries without shadows, progress without cost, breakthroughs without sacrifice. But these hidden experiments reveal a different truth, one far messier, far more human, and far more enduring. Some were designed to test the limits of human biology. Viruses engineered under controlled conditions, radiation exposure carefully measured, chemical compounds introduced with precise dosage, all with the intent of observing, recording, and understanding the thresholds of survival. Every tremor of the body, every faltering heartbeat, every minute shift in neural activity was documented. The participants were rarely informed of the full scope of the experiments, and yet, unknowingly, they became both the subject and the record, the data and the story. The knowledge gained from such studies would later influence medicine, emergency response, and military strategy, though the human cost was quietly excised from the narrative, remembered only in the hidden whispers of those who bore witness. Other experiments were psychological in nature, exploring the fragile architecture of the mind. Memory could be manipulated, perceptions shifted, and emotions provoked in ways that the conscious self could not always trace. Subjects were often unaware of the boundaries being tested, yet the results revealed profound truths about obedience, fear, desire, and resilience. Entire social structures, political systems, and educational methodologies would later incorporate these findings, whether consciously or unconsciously, shaping generations in ways the original participants could never have anticipated. And though ethics committees would eventually arise to curb excess, the precedent had already been set. Curiosity and ambition, unchecked, can profoundly alter human behavior. The experiments extended to communities as well, sometimes entire towns, sometimes isolated populations. Social behaviors were monitored under scarcity, stress, or misinformation. Compliance, rebellion, cooperation, and betrayal were all recorded as if humanity itself were a single organism, its reactions measured with obsessive precision. The outcomes informed not only scientific understanding but also policy, law, and strategy, creating a subtle, invisible architecture that governs human interactions even today. People walked through streets, attended markets, formed relationships, all while unknowingly participating in experiments designed to map the contours of human society itself. The lessons learned were hidden in plain sight, encoded into systems, education, and governance, leaving an indelible imprint that few could trace but all would feel. Some of the most chilling undertakings involved manipulating perception and memory, testing the very fabric of identity. Hallucinations induced chemically or through sensory deprivation, memory distortion, sleep disruption, and prolonged isolation revealed vulnerabilities that the conscious mind could not anticipate. Participants emerged altered, sometimes irreversibly, carrying the subtle traces of control in thought patterns, emotional responses, and subconscious behaviors. The ethical transgressions were profound, yet the knowledge gleaned patterns of decision-making, moral compromise, and resilience under duress would later influence fields ranging from military strategy to behavioral economics, social engineering, and therapeutic psychology. Humanity itself became the subject, a living archive of possibility and peril, its lessons written in nerves, hormones, and synapses rather than printed pages. The architects of these experiments understood the importance of secrecy. They worked beneath layers of bureaucracy, in remote locations, in laboratories concealed beneath mountains, abandoned factories, and hidden complexes. Observations were logged in encrypted records, destroyed when no longer useful or intentionally misfiled to prevent discovery. Knowledge was preserved selectively, passed down to trusted successors, or fragmented across time and space. And yet, no matter how carefully hidden, the imprint of these studies persisted, visible in human behavior, social norms, and technological innovation. The influence of the unremembered reaches beyond the laboratory into the heart of civilization itself, shaping the world without explicit acknowledgement. Some experiments explored the ethical boundaries of life itself. Organisms were spliced, genes altered, and boundaries between natural and synthetic questioned. In some cases, human subjects were exposed to conditions that tested resilience, adaptation, and survival, while researchers meticulously documented results. The lessons learned extended beyond the immediate context, informing medicine, agriculture, genetics, and even artificial intelligence. And yet, the human cost was often ignored, sanitized from history, buried beneath layers of technical language and official documentation. The duality of these experiments, the brilliance of insight paired with the darkness of ethical compromise, remains a defining characteristic of humanity's hidden pursuit of knowledge. Even in the modern age, the echoes of these experiments persist. Behavioral research, genetic engineering, neuropsychology, and artificial intelligence all carry traces of methods first tested in secrecy. Algorithms predicting human behavior, simulations of social dynamics, and the subtle nudges embedded in digital environments are the modern descendants of clandestine studies, once conducted behind locked doors. And while contemporary ethical standards have improved transparency and accountability, the lessons of the unremembered remain embedded in the foundations of our knowledge, shaping behavior and decision-making at scales both personal and societal. These experiments reveal more than data. They reveal the dual nature of humanity itself. Ambition drives discovery, yet curiosity without caution can create harm. Observation yields insight, yet exploitation leaves scars. Humanity's capacity for creativity, resilience, and intelligence is mirrored in these hidden studies, alongside its capacity for recklessness, cruelty, and moral compromise. In the shadows of these experiments, we confront the uncomfortable truth that progress is never ethically neutral, that knowledge carries responsibility, and that curiosity, when unchecked, can leave legacies that echo far beyond the laboratory walls. And so, the experiments humanity was never supposed to remember are neither purely historical nor fully contained. They continue to inform modern science, society, and ethics, sometimes in ways that are invisible, sometimes in ways that are undeniable. Their influence is woven into the fabric of education, policy, medicine, and technology. They exist as silent teachers, reminding us that every choice, every act of inquiry, every pursuit of knowledge carries consequences. And in that reminder lies the enduring value of memory, even memory that was deliberately obscured. In every hidden experiment, there is a lesson about the fragility and resilience of humanity. Some experiments revealed courage and innovation. Some revealed obedience and vulnerability. Others revealed ethical failure, greed, or hubris. Taken together, they are a mirror of human potential and limitation, a reflection of the eternal tension between curiosity and morality. And the most haunting truth is that this mirror exists not in theory or abstraction but in our very lives, influencing thought, behavior, and social structure in ways we may never fully recognize. The experiments were not confined to the past. They persist in the present, informing research, shaping innovation, and guiding policy. Advances in medicine, psychology, and social engineering often trace roots back to methods tested under conditions of secrecy, ambiguity, or ethical compromise. And while contemporary science emphasizes consent, transparency, and ethics, the legacy of the unremembered reminds us that progress often comes with hidden costs, that knowledge is inseparable from responsibility, and that memory, once obscured, can always resurface, demanding reflection, reckoning, and care. Every generation encounters these legacies differently. For some, they are academic curiosities, For others, they are moral imperatives, warnings to tread carefully in the pursuit of understanding. But in all cases, the experiment's humanity was never supposed to remember compel acknowledgement of the delicate balance between discovery and conscience. They reveal that human curiosity is a force both beautiful and dangerous, capable of producing brilliance, suffering, and insight simultaneously. And in recognizing this, humanity confronts one of its most enduring challenges: how to explore the unknown while preserving the ethical foundation of the world it inhabits. And so, as we move forward, as research continues in laboratories, as algorithms grow more sophisticated, as medicine probes deeper into the mechanisms of life, we carry the unseen weight of these experiments. They remind us that knowledge is not merely an end but a responsibility, that understanding is inseparable from ethics, and that humanity's greatest achievements are inseparable from its shadows. The experiments, though hidden, persist, quietly shaping thought, behavior, and society, and asking a question that remains unresolved. How far should curiosity go before it becomes something else entirely? Even now, in the present, the echoes of unremembered experiments resonate. They whisper in the design of social systems, in the algorithms that influence our decisions, in the ethical debates that shape policy. They remind us that memory cannot be fully erased, that human curiosity leaves traces, and that history, no matter how deeply buried, exerts influence over the living. These experiments, though cloaked in secrecy, are part of the continuous story of humanity. A story of curiosity, ambition, moral complexity, and the perpetual tension between knowledge and responsibility. And when we acknowledge them, when we confront the unremembered, we are reminded of our own nature. We are creatures of inquiry, of imagination, and of reckoning. We seek, we observe, we experiment. And yet, in every pursuit, we must confront the ethical shadow that follows, a reminder that every discovery carries a cost, and that every act of knowledge demands reflection, accountability, and care. The experiments humanity was never supposed to remember are not merely hidden records. They are teachers, guardians of the limits, and silent witnesses to the full spectrum of human possibility. The story of the experiments humanity was never supposed to remember is not only a chronicle of actions and outcomes, but also a meditation on the fragility of ethics in the face of curiosity. In every era, there have been those who believed that the pursuit of knowledge justified transgression, that the end, discovery, innovation, survival, could eclipse the means. And in their laboratories, hidden from prying eyes, they pursued questions that most societies deemed unthinkable. Human bodies, minds, and environments became instruments for inquiry, measured with precision, recorded with obsessive care, and yet often left without the comfort of consent or comprehension. The consequences were immediate for the participants and enduring for humanity, shaping both our understanding of the world and our perception of ourselves. Some experiments sought to unravel the mysteries of the human mind at scales and intensities that remain astonishing. Researchers probed memory, perception, and cognition, sometimes inducing extreme stress, sometimes chemically altering consciousness, sometimes isolating individuals in silence or sensory overload. They observed how humans respond under duress, how moral reasoning bends under pressure, and how identity persists or fractures under conditions that seem unimaginable to ordinary life. The subjects often emerged changed, carrying invisible marks in their behavior, thought, and emotional responses. And the lessons drawn from these studies, sanitized in reports or abstracted in scientific literature, shaped the development of modern psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral sciences. even as the public remained unaware of the hidden origins of the knowledge. Other experiments expanded beyond individuals into entire communities, towns, or populations. Patterns of human interaction, social compliance, leadership dynamics, and responses to scarcity were carefully orchestrated and observed. Volunteers or unknowing participants became living datasets. Their choices, behaviors, and interactions meticulously documented. These studies were designed not just to answer theoretical questions but to understand society itself, how humans organize, obey, resist, and innovate under controlled but stressful conditions. The insights gleaned informed governance, education, and social planning, leaving a subtle but undeniable mark on the fabric of modern civilization. And yet, the cost, moral and human, often remained unacknowledged, buried beneath layers of secrecy and rationalization. Some of the most extreme experiments involved life itself. The manipulation of genetics, chemical exposure, disease inoculation, and radical interventions in development and physiology. Cells were spliced, organisms altered, and boundaries between natural and artificial pushed to limits once thought inviolate. Human subjects, where involved, were often treated as data points, their responses measured with scientific rigor but little empathy. The findings, however, became foundational in medicine, pharmacology, genetics, and bioengineering. Yet the hidden human toll, suffering, trauma, and sometimes death, remained largely unrecorded in public discourse. These experiments remind us that the pursuit of knowledge is inseparable from moral responsibility and that discoveries born of secrecy can leave consequences as enduring as the innovations themselves. Even in the realm of social and psychological experimentation, secrecy played a pivotal role. Many studies were deliberately concealed, their methods obfuscated, their results fragmented across multiple archives, laboratories, and nations. Researchers were aware that exposure could provoke outrage, legal repercussions, or societal distrust, and so they meticulously constructed layers of concealment. Yet no matter how deep the secrecy, the experiments left traces, patterns of human behavior, social structures, and technological designs that reflected their influence. In this way, the unremembered became foundational, quietly shaping knowledge, policy, and ethics long after the original studies concluded. The consequences were not confined to the individuals or groups directly studied. The ripple effects extended across generations. Practices, policies, and technologies developed using insights from hidden experiments altered education, healthcare, governance, and social interaction. Communities unknowingly shaped by these studies inherited patterns of behavior, problem-solving strategies, and responses to authority that were tested in secret. The moral lessons of these hidden experiments were often obscured, yet their influence was pervasive. Humanity was learning, often unconsciously, from experiments whose subjects had no agency over the outcomes and whose ethics had been compromised for the sake of insight. There were also experiments that tested endurance, resilience, and the limits of survival in extreme environments. Human tolerance to heat, cold, altitude, isolation, or deprivation was measured under controlled yet ethically ambiguous conditions. Each individual became a living map of physiological and psychological thresholds, their responses meticulously charted. The data generated informed survival training, emergency protocols, and even military strategy, shaping how society understood its capacity for endurance and adaptation. Yet the personal cost, the invisible scars borne by participants, was rarely acknowledged. These experiments, though hidden, left marks that extended far beyond the laboratory, influencing how society prepared for disaster, conflict, and environmental extremes. Some studies focused on perception, cognition, and influence. Participants were exposed to stimuli designed to manipulate thought, memory, or emotion. Sleep deprivation, sensory isolation, chemical agents, and behavioral conditioning were tools used to probe the limits of awareness, judgment, and moral reasoning. The results informed fields ranging from cognitive science to behavioral economics, shaping understandings of decision-making, motivation, and societal response. And while these applications often benefited society, the origins of the knowledge, the unconsented, unrecorded human experiences, remain hidden, forming a shadow history that questions the ethical foundation of progress. The experiments also revealed an enduring truth about humanity. Our capacity for curiosity and discovery is matched by our vulnerability to overreach. Ambition, untempered by ethics, can yield knowledge and innovation but also inflict harm that echoes far beyond the laboratory. The hidden experiments show that science is inseparable from morality, that observation carries responsibility, and that every act of inquiry leaves traces, ethical or otherwise. Humanity's brilliance and its blind spots are intertwined, inseparable, reflected in the meticulous records of studies that the world was never meant to remember. Even as technology advanced, the experiments evolved. Digital simulations, artificial intelligence, and algorithmic modeling became modern laboratories. Human behavior, social interaction, and decision-making could be studied at unprecedented scale and subtlety, sometimes without the subject's knowledge. The legacy of older, hidden experiments informed these modern studies, providing frameworks, methods, and ethical challenges inherited from the past. Knowledge continues to expand, yet the tension between discovery and responsibility remains unresolved, reminding humanity that curiosity, while essential, carries weight that cannot be ignored. The unremembered experiments are also a meditation on memory itself. Erased documents, redacted reports, and destroyed records may conceal the visible trace of activity, but memory, both personal and collective, preserves what is hidden. Knowledge, once uncovered, resonates across generations. Humans internalize lessons from unrecorded experiences, from subtle manipulations, from inherited societal patterns. The experiments, though deliberately obscured, persist in consciousness, culture, and institutional practice. They remind us that nothing, truly, is ever fully lost. Knowledge, behavior, and consequence flow like a hidden current beneath the surface of society. These experiments also challenge the idea of control. Despite meticulous planning, careful observation, and rigorous methodology, outcomes often exceeded the expectations of the researchers. Unforeseen reactions, emergent behaviors, and unintended consequences were common. The very act of experimentation introduces variables beyond control, a reminder that curiosity interacts with a world far more complex than any single observer can predict. The hidden experiments underscore the humility necessary in any pursuit of knowledge. No matter how precise, no matter how secret, consequences extend beyond observation and prediction, shaping the world in ways both subtle and profound. Some of the experiments remain fully obscured, their records destroyed or encrypted, their locations forgotten. Only fragments remain, references in personal diaries, faint notes in scientific journals, hints in oral history. Yet even these fragments hint at the profound scope of ambition, the scale of inquiry, and the ethical compromises made in the pursuit of knowledge. They reveal that humanity's quest to understand itself and the universe is inseparable from risk, uncertainty, and moral complexity. The experiments we were never meant to remember serve as a mirror, reflecting both our potential and our limitations, our genius and our hubris. And so the legacy of these hidden experiments is enduring. It persists in science, in technology, in ethics, in culture. It reminds us that curiosity carries responsibility, that knowledge carries consequence, and that discovery is never neutral. Even when erased, redacted, or hidden, the experiments shape thought, influence behavior, and inform society in ways that are often invisible but always real. They are part of the continuum of human endeavor, a testament to both the brilliance and the caution that define the pursuit of understanding. The experiments humanity was never supposed to remember are more than history. They are living lessons, ethical signposts, and quiet witnesses. They reveal the tension between ambition and morality, curiosity and consequence, secrecy and transparency. They remind us that knowledge is inseparable from responsibility, and that every pursuit of understanding is accompanied by ethical weight. And as humanity continues to explore, to innovate, and to push boundaries, the hidden experiments remain, silently shaping what is learned, what is remembered, and what is forgotten. The hidden experiments of humanity are not just historical footnotes. They are living, breathing threads woven into the fabric of our present. Each discovery, each insight, each subtle manipulation, whether visible or buried, has rippled outward, influencing medicine, society, technology, and culture. And yet, for every breakthrough, there is a shadow, a human cost, an ethical compromise, a question of morality that was deferred, ignored, or rationalized. These experiments exist in the spaces between knowledge and conscience, in the tension between ambition and restraint, reminding us that the pursuit of understanding is never neutral. They teach that curiosity is a force that can illuminate or devastate, inspire or corrupt, depending on the choices made in its pursuit. Some experiments were designed to test obedience in extraordinary circumstances, revealing not just compliance but the moral flexibility of individuals. Under controlled stress, with authority figures directing actions that challenged ethical norms, participants revealed capacities for both cruelty and empathy, for conformity and resistance. The results, meticulously documented, informed sociology, psychology, military strategy, and even political philosophy. Yet the human experience of these experiments, the fear, the confusion, the moral conflict, was seldom acknowledged. The invisible scars endured by participants became part of a broader, unspoken narrative about the fragility and resilience of the human psyche. Other experiments delved into the extremes of human endurance, probing the limits of physiology and survival. Subjects faced prolonged isolation, exposure to extreme temperatures, deprivation of food or sleep, and simulated threats to life. Every heartbeat, hormone level, and neural response was measured, cataloged, and analyzed. The knowledge gleaned informed disaster preparedness, survival training, and emergency response protocols, shaping how society responds to crisis. Yet the participants' suffering was often sanitized in official records, leaving a silent testimony to the cost of knowledge gained in shadows. These studies revealed both the incredible resilience of humanity and the ethical ambiguity of experiments conducted without full consent. Biological and medical experiments pushed boundaries further, often testing interventions on human subjects with minimal disclosure. Chemical compounds, viral agents, and radiation exposure were used to explore responses and thresholds, while physiological reactions were meticulously logged. While the resulting insights advanced medicine, public health, and pharmacology, the ethical implications were profound. Consent was frequently incomplete or absent, and participants became both subject and instrument, their bodies a canvas for inquiry. These experiments underscore a fundamental tension in human exploration: the desire to know and the imperative to respect, the pursuit of progress weighed against the value of individual autonomy. Some experiments expanded into social engineering, exploring the limits of influence and manipulation. Populations were subjected to controlled misinformation, scarcity, or pressure, revealing patterns of obedience, resistance, and adaptation. Entire communities became living laboratories, their behavior analyzed to understand the mechanics of societal cohesion, dissent, and compliance. The insights, though cloaked in secrecy, shaped policy, governance, and education, leaving traces that ripple through society even today. They highlight a persistent paradox. The quest to understand humanity sometimes requires bending it, raising ethical questions that persist long after the experiments themselves have concluded. The experiments also probed perception, cognition, and identity. Participants were exposed to altered sensory environments, sleep disruption, chemical manipulation, and isolation, revealing vulnerabilities and capacities of the mind previously unimagined. Memory, emotion, and perception were analyzed with unprecedented granularity, offering profound insights into human thought, behavior, and creativity. Yet the ethical shadow remains. The experiences imposed on participants were sometimes traumatic, shaping their understanding of reality, trust, and selfhood. These studies illuminate the delicate balance between discovery and harm, curiosity and responsibility, underscoring that knowledge carries ethical weight as well as practical utility. Secrecy was intrinsic to these endeavors. Laboratories were hidden, archives encrypted, and records obscured to ensure that the scope and nature of experiments remained inaccessible to the public. Researchers understood that revelation could provoke outrage, legal consequences, or societal distrust. Yet the concealment also ensured that the outcomes, both insights and consequences, persisted invisibly, influencing knowledge, policy, and culture. Humanity's hidden experiments reveal that the pursuit of understanding is often entwined with discretion, secrecy, and moral ambiguity, and that knowledge carries consequences even when invisible. Some experiments challenged life itself, manipulating genetics, cells, and biology to explore adaptation, resilience, and transformation. Organisms were altered, hybridized, or exposed to conditions that tested the limits of natural systems. Human participants, where involved, were subjected to chemical, biological, or physiological interventions that mapped thresholds of tolerance and response. While the resulting discoveries advanced medicine, genetics, and biotechnology, they also highlight an enduring tension. The human cost, often unrecorded, contrasts with the societal benefits, forcing reflection on the ethics of innovation in secrecy. The influence of hidden experiments extends beyond immediate findings. Insights gained under concealment have informed modern science, technology, and social understanding. Algorithms predicting behavior, simulations modeling social dynamics, and technologies shaping human interaction carry echoes of earlier clandestine studies. Modern experimentation inherits the methods, patterns, and moral lessons of the unremembered, embedding their legacy in contemporary society. Even as ethical oversight improves, the hidden foundations remain, shaping knowledge and behavior in subtle but profound ways. Memory itself plays a critical role in the narrative of hidden experiments. Erased documents, redacted files, and destroyed records obscure direct knowledge, yet collective memory preserves fragments. Patterns in social behavior, inherited trauma, subtle cues in cultural practice. The human mind retains traces of what is hidden, internalizing lessons and consequences that formal documentation may have obliterated. These experiments demonstrate that knowledge, once gained, is rarely entirely lost. Even when deliberately obscured, it continues to influence thought, behavior, and society. The experiments also highlight the limits of control. Despite meticulous design, variables often exceeded expectations. Participants reacted unpredictably, social dynamics evolved independently, and consequences extended beyond intended parameters. These outcomes underscore a central truth. Curiosity interacts with a world far more complex than any experimenter can predict. Hidden experiments reveal the humility necessary in human inquiry. No matter how controlled, no matter how secret, consequences are inevitable, and ethical responsibility cannot be delegated to observation alone. Many experiments remain fully obscured, existing only in fragments, whispers, or partial records. Even so, these traces offer profound insight into human ambition, creativity, and ethical compromise. They illustrate the duality of curiosity, the drive to understand and innovate, coupled with the capacity for oversight, error, or harm. They demonstrate that discovery is inseparable from consequence, and curiosity is inseparable from responsibility. Hidden experiments illuminate the delicate balance between ambition and morality, showing that every pursuit of knowledge carries weight, both visible and invisible. They challenge humanity to reflect on the ethical boundaries of inquiry, the limits of control, and the enduring consequences of curiosity pursued without conscience. Even today, the echoes of these unremembered experiments persist. Modern behavioral research, social engineering, cognitive modeling, and technological development all contain traces of methods tested under secrecy. Ethical dilemmas derived from past studies inform contemporary practice, shaping research design, policy development, and institutional oversight. The hidden experiments serve as reminders that curiosity, while essential, carries moral responsibility, that knowledge is inseparable from consequence, and that the lessons of secrecy endure, guiding, cautioning, and illuminating human endeavor. These studies illuminate human resilience, vulnerability, adaptability, and creativity. They reveal that knowledge and ethical responsibility are intertwined, that curiosity carries consequence, and that even hidden actions leave lasting influence. The hidden experiments are mirrors, reflecting humanity's strengths and weaknesses, ambition and oversight, creativity and caution. They remind us that ethical reflection is inseparable from the pursuit of understanding, and that knowledge, while powerful, is never neutral. Ultimately, the experiments humanity was never supposed to remember challenge us to confront the tension between discovery and morality. They ask us to consider the cost of knowledge, the consequences of curiosity, and the enduring responsibilities of observation. They teach that insight, while transformative, is inseparable from ethics, and that secrecy, while sometimes necessary, cannot erase impact. The hidden experiments are both historical records and living lessons, guiding humanity toward a balance between ambition and conscience, curiosity and accountability. And so the unremembered experiments persist, not only in archives or whispers, but in the very foundations of modern knowledge. They shape contemporary science, policy, technology, and society. They remind humanity that the pursuit of understanding is inseparable from responsibility, and that every act of inquiry, no matter how hidden, leaves consequences. The legacy of these experiments endures, challenging us to confront the past, reflect on our ethical obligations, and navigate the complexities of curiosity with awareness and care. The hidden experiments of humanity are far more than historical footnotes. They are a living reflection of our relentless pursuit to understand, to control, and to predict both the world around us and the world within ourselves. Every lab, every controlled scenario, every hidden study represents an intersection of ambition, curiosity, and moral uncertainty. They illuminate not only what humanity is capable of understanding, but also what it is capable of overlooking in the process. The unremembered experiments are a testament to both our intellectual audacity and our ethical vulnerability. A reminder that knowledge without conscience can reverberate across generations in ways both visible and invisible. Some of these experiments explored the human mind with precision that bordered on obsession. Researchers manipulated perception, memory, and decision-making, often under extreme conditions. Individuals were subjected to sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, chemical influence, and social pressure to observe how cognition and behavior shift under duress. Every response, conscious or subconscious, was meticulously measured, cataloged, and analyzed. These studies informed psychology, behavioral science, marketing, and social dynamics. Yet the personal experience, the confusion, distress, and disorientation of participants was often omitted, leaving behind only data points, silent witnesses to human resilience and vulnerability alike. Other experiments sought to understand the limits of physical endurance. Humans were subjected to extreme cold, heat, deprivation of food and water, and simulated life-threatening situations. Every physiological response, from heart rate to metabolic change, was carefully monitored. The resulting insights advanced medicine, emergency preparedness, and survival training. Yet the ethical cost, the suffering borne by those individuals, was largely invisible to society. Hidden experiments of this kind reveal a recurring tension, the value of knowledge weighed against human well-being. They remind us that progress often comes with a silent, ethical price. Social experimentation expanded the scope even further. Entire communities, neighborhoods, or isolated populations became laboratories for observation. Patterns of obedience, dissent, cooperation, and conflict were tested under artificially constructed conditions. Scarcity, authority, and misinformation were applied with precision to observe social behavior. The insights gleaned influenced governance, education, policy, and societal organization. Yet the human experience of these manipulations, stress, fear, disillusionment, was largely ignored. The consequences, though hidden, persisted in subtle, structural, and generational ways, illustrating that secrecy does not negate impact. It merely conceals it from immediate view. Some of the most extreme experiments intersected with life itself. Genetic studies, biochemical interventions, and radical physiological tests were performed on humans and other organisms. These experiments sought to understand adaptation, resilience, and the boundaries of biological function. Every reaction, every adaptation, and every failure was meticulously logged. Yet participants were rarely fully informed, and the moral implications were often suppressed. These studies advanced fields ranging from medicine to bioengineering, yet the human cost, the suffering, and ethical compromise remains largely unacknowledged. Hidden experiments demonstrate the duality of science. Innovation and knowledge coexisting with moral ambiguity and human consequence. Psychological and cognitive experiments often blurred reality itself. Participants were placed in situations that tested perception, memory, and judgment. Sleep deprivation, sensory overload, isolation, and chemical manipulation were used to explore the architecture of consciousness. Researchers observed how participants' identities and perceptions shifted under controlled conditions. The results influenced cognitive science, behavioral therapy, and even marketing psychology. But the lived experience, the stress, fear, and altered sense of self, remained largely undocumented. Hidden experiments of this nature challenged the boundaries between knowledge and ethics, illustrating the ongoing tension between discovery and human dignity. Secrecy was integral to these endeavors. Laboratories were isolated, locations hidden, archives encrypted, and records destroyed or dispersed. Researchers knew that public disclosure could provoke moral outrage, legal action, or institutional collapse. Yet secrecy did more than protect the experimenters. It ensured that observations remained unaltered by external interference, preserving the integrity of data while simultaneously embedding ethical ambiguity into the foundation of knowledge. Hidden experiments reveal that the pursuit of understanding often exists alongside concealment, and that influence persists even when it is unacknowledged. Some studies specifically tested moral judgment and obedience. Individuals were asked to perform tasks that challenged ethical norms, to weigh self-interest against collective good, and to navigate authority under pressure. Compliance, defiance, and moral compromise were all carefully documented. The findings informed military strategy, governance, social policy, and educational design. Yet the subjective experience of participants, the internal struggle, fear, and ethical tension, was rarely acknowledged. These experiments demonstrate the fragility and adaptability of human morality, revealing the subtle forces that shape human behavior under duress. The impact of hidden experiments extends far beyond individual laboratories. Insights gained in secrecy influence contemporary social, technological, and scientific practice. Algorithms that predict human behavior, digital simulations, public health strategies, and psychological interventions all contain elements derived from clandestine studies. Even as modern ethics frameworks improve oversight and transparency, the legacy of unremembered experiments continues to shape contemporary knowledge, illustrating that hidden history can exert influence long after the original acts have concluded. Biological and medical experimentation pushed boundaries of life itself. Chemical agents, viruses, radiation, and genetic manipulation were applied to test limits of adaptation, disease resistance, and recovery. Human participants frequently lacked full consent, yet their experiences informed treatments, preventive strategies, and biomedical knowledge. These experiments illuminate the tension between progress and ethics, highlighting the human cost of knowledge gained in secrecy and the enduring impact on medicine, public health, and biotechnology. The hidden experiments also reveal the limits of prediction and control. Despite meticulous planning, outcomes often exceeded expectations. Subjects reacted unpredictably, social dynamics evolved independently, and unintended consequences emerged. Hidden studies demonstrate a fundamental truth. Curiosity engages with a world that cannot be fully controlled. Knowledge carries uncertainty, and observation carries responsibility. Even in secrecy, the consequences of human experimentation extend beyond immediate observation, impacting individuals, communities, and cultural memory. Memory, both collective and individual, preserves the lessons of these experiments. Erased documents, redacted records, and destroyed archives obscure direct evidence, yet indirect traces endure in patterns of behavior, inherited social practices, and institutional norms. Knowledge, once gained, rarely disappears entirely. Hidden experiments demonstrate that human experience, ethical lessons, and consequences persist, influencing behavior, culture, and decision-making across generations, long after the original study has concluded. These experiments illuminate the duality of human curiosity. They reveal the potential for insight, creativity, and progress alongside the risk of oversight, harm, and ethical compromise. They remind us that discovery is inseparable from consequence, that ambition must be tempered by moral consideration, and that secrecy does not absolve responsibility. Hidden experiments challenge humanity to confront the ethical dimensions of inquiry, acknowledging that knowledge, while powerful, carries consequences for those involved and for society at large. Even in contemporary research, echoes of hidden experiments persist. Behavioral modeling, social engineering, cognitive science, and technology development draw upon methods refined in secrecy. Ethical dilemmas informed by past studies continue to shape modern practice, reminding humanity that curiosity is inseparable from responsibility, and that knowledge is inseparable from moral obligation. The unremembered experiments, though concealed, serve as enduring guides, cautioning, illuminating, and shaping the trajectory of inquiry and understanding. Ultimately, the experiments humanity was never supposed to remember are not just a reflection of the past. They are active influences shaping ethics, knowledge, policy, and society. They remind us that every act of inquiry carries responsibility, that every pursuit of understanding leaves traces, and that secrecy cannot erase the consequences of curiosity. Hidden experiments are both warnings and lessons, illuminating the complex interplay between ambition, morality, and human resilience, guiding humanity as it continues to explore the unknown. The legacy of these experiments endures, not in headlines, but in laboratories, algorithms, institutions, and memory. They shape the way society approaches research, informs policy, and navigates ethical dilemmas. They challenge us to balance curiosity with conscience, insight with responsibility, and ambition with awareness. Hidden experiments remind humanity that discovery, while essential, is never ethically neutral, and that knowledge gained in secrecy leaves ripples that persist far longer than the experiments themselves. The experiments humanity was never supposed to remember reveal far more than forgotten facts or hidden laboratories. They expose the contours of ambition, the edges of morality, and the depths of human curiosity. Each study, no matter how secret, carries the weight of consequence, leaving traces that reverberate across time, society, and consciousness. They remind us that curiosity is a double-edged force. It illuminates the unknown, but it also challenges ethical boundaries, sometimes at the cost of human well-being, sometimes at the cost of human dignity. Hidden experiments compel reflection on the limits of control, the consequences of observation, and the ethical responsibilities inherent in the pursuit of knowledge. Many experiments tested obedience and authority. Humans were placed in controlled hierarchies, instructed to act against personal conscience or societal norms, and observed under carefully calibrated conditions. Researchers sought to understand compliance, resistance, and moral flexibility, probing the intersection between authority and personal ethics. The lessons derived informed policy, military strategy, and psychological theory. Yet participants' lived experience, the fear, tension, and internal conflict, was rarely acknowledged. Hidden experiments thus expose both the fragility and resilience of human morality, illustrating how context and pressure shape behavior in ways that are often unseen but profoundly influential. Other experiments explored physical and psychological endurance under extreme conditions. Subjects were exposed to temperature extremes, isolation, deprivation, and artificial stressors designed to test adaptation and resilience. Every physiological and psychological response was recorded. Heart rate fluctuations, hormone changes, neural activity, and emotional state. The knowledge gleaned shaped medicine, emergency response, survival training, and behavioral science. Yet the ethical cost, the suffering, trauma, and long-term consequences endured by participants remains largely invisible. These studies reveal the persistent tension between progress and human dignity, highlighting the moral weight embedded in the pursuit of understanding. Social experiments extended the reach of observation from individuals to groups and communities. Entire populations were manipulated through scarcity, misinformation, or orchestrated conflict to study cohesion, compliance, and rebellion. These experiments provided insight into governance, education, societal organization, and policy design. The immediate human impact, stress, confusion, disillusionment was rarely documented. Yet the lessons persisted, subtly shaping social structures, cultural norms, and institutional practices. Hidden experiments illustrate that knowledge does not exist in isolation. It interacts with, transforms, and influences society long after the initial observation concludes. Some of the most audacious studies engaged with the very essence of life. Genetic interventions, biochemical manipulations, and radical physiological tests explored adaptation, resilience, and transformation. Human and non-human subjects were exposed to conditions that challenged the limits of survival and adaptability. The resulting knowledge informed medicine, biotechnology, and genetics. Yet ethical oversight was minimal or absent, leaving participants vulnerable to unintended consequences. These experiments exemplify the tension inherent in human innovation. Progress is inseparable from ethical responsibility, and knowledge obtained in secrecy carries ramifications that extend far beyond the laboratory. Psychological and cognitive experiments often manipulated perception, memory, and consciousness. Participants endured sensory distortion, sleep deprivation, social isolation, and chemical influence to uncover the mechanisms underlying cognition, memory formation, and emotional response. Researchers meticulously recorded every reaction, yet the subjective experience, the disorientation, stress, and psychological strain, was often unacknowledged. These studies illuminate the delicate balance between discovery and dignity, demonstrating that ethical reflection is inseparable from intellectual pursuit. Hidden experiments challenge humanity to weigh the pursuit of knowledge against the moral implications of its acquisition. Secrecy was both a tool and a consequence. Laboratories were isolated, locations obscured, archives fragmented or destroyed. Researchers understood that disclosure could provoke outrage, legal action, or societal distrust. Secrecy preserved experimental integrity and ensured that observations remained untainted by external influence. Yet it also embedded ethical ambiguity into the foundation of knowledge, creating a dual legacy: advancement of understanding and concealment of consequence. Hidden experiments reveal the enduring influence of secrecy. Knowledge, once gained, continues to shape thought, behavior, and societal practice, whether remembered or forgotten. Experiments testing moral judgment and obedience revealed uncomfortable truths about the human condition. Individuals were instructed to act contrary to personal values, under the influence of authority, in structured or coercive contexts. Compliance, defiance, and moral negotiation were carefully documented, informing understanding of human behavior under pressure. Yet participants' experiences, the fear, conflict, and ethical tension, remained largely invisible. These studies illustrate the subtle forces shaping human morality and the ways in which social, environmental, and psychological pressures influence ethical decision-making. Hidden experiments reveal that morality is not absolute. It is situational, dynamic, and often tested under conditions most people never encounter. The impact of these hidden experiments extends into contemporary society. Modern behavioral research, artificial intelligence, social engineering, and public health initiatives all contain traces of methodologies developed under secrecy. Algorithms predicting behavior, simulations modeling societal dynamics, and interventions shaping cognition inherit the legacy of unremembered studies. Even as ethical oversight improves, the influence of these experiments persists, reminding humanity that the past, however concealed, continues to shape the present and inform the future. Biological and medical experimentation pushed boundaries into the domain of life itself. Viral exposure, chemical testing, radiation, and genetic manipulation explored thresholds of adaptation, disease resistance, and recovery. Human participants, often uninformed, bore consequences that remained invisible to the broader society. These experiments illuminate the ethical tension inherent in scientific discovery. The pursuit of knowledge is inseparable from human consequence. Hidden experiments remind us that innovation carries moral responsibility, and that even in secrecy, actions have lasting effects. The hidden experiments also illustrate the limits of control and prediction. Despite careful planning, outcomes often exceeded expectations. Subjects reacted unpredictably, social dynamics evolved autonomously, and unforeseen consequences emerged. Hidden studies emphasize a fundamental truth. Curiosity engages a world that is inherently complex and uncontrollable. Observation alone does not guarantee understanding, and even in secrecy, consequences ripple outward, affecting individuals, communities, and culture in ways that cannot always be anticipated. Memory, both individual and collective, preserves the influence of these experiments. Even when documents are destroyed, records redacted, or archives lost, indirect traces remain. Behavioral patterns, social norms, institutional practices, and cultural memory all carry fragments of hidden experimentation. Knowledge, once acquired, rarely disappears entirely. Hidden experiments demonstrate that lessons, consequences, and ethical reflections endure, influencing thought, action, and societal development long after the experiments themselves have ended. The duality of human curiosity is evident in these experiments. It can drive insight, innovation, and resilience, yet it can also produce harm, oversight, and moral compromise. Discovery is inseparable from consequence, ambition is inseparable from responsibility, and knowledge is inseparable from ethics. Hidden experiments illuminate the need for conscientious reflection, revealing the tension between progress and morality, insight and human dignity, ambition and ethical restraint. Even today, echoes of these experiments are present. Modern research, behavioral modeling, cognitive science, technology development, and public policy all contain elements derived from clandestine studies. Ethical reflection informed by past mistakes continues to shape contemporary practice. Hidden experiments remain active guides, cautioning, illuminating, and shaping the trajectory of inquiry. They remind humanity that curiosity is inseparable from responsibility and that knowledge, once gained, exerts influence far beyond the laboratory. Ultimately, the experiments humanity was never supposed to remember challenge us to confront our ambition, ethics, and responsibility. They illustrate that knowledge carries consequence, that curiosity carries moral weight, and that secrecy does not erase impact. Hidden experiments are not merely historical artifacts. They are active forces shaping understanding, policy, culture, and consciousness. They compel reflection on the balance between discovery and morality, guiding humanity toward insight that is tempered by conscience and curiosity tempered by accountability. The legacy of these hidden experiments endures, embedded not only in records, laboratories, and institutions, but in the very structure of knowledge itself. They shape modern science, inform ethical standards, and influence societal norms. They remind humanity that the pursuit of understanding is inseparable from responsibility, that curiosity without conscience carries risk, and that every act of inquiry leaves a trace that persists, often invisibly, across time. Hidden experiments are lessons, warnings, and enduring guides, illuminating the path of human exploration while reminding us of the moral dimensions of discovery. The experiments humanity was never supposed to remember are more than hidden stories. They are mirrors reflecting the complex interplay between curiosity, ambition, and morality. They teach us that the pursuit of knowledge, while essential, carries profound ethical responsibility, that every act of observation leaves consequences, and that secrecy does not erase impact. These experiments reveal both the heights of human ingenuity and the depths of human oversight, showing that discovery and consequence are inseparable. They remind us that knowledge gained without conscience can ripple across generations, shaping societies, policies, and human understanding in ways both subtle and profound. Yet, they also illuminate resilience, adaptability, and the capacity for reflection, reminding humanity that the same curiosity that risks harm also drives progress, innovation, and insight. The legacy of these hidden experiments endures, not merely in records or laboratories, but in the very way humanity approaches inquiry, ethics, and the unknown. They challenge us to balance ambition with responsibility, curiosity with conscience, and discovery with moral awareness. In remembering them, even when they were never meant to be remembered, we honor both the pursuit of understanding and the humanity that must guide it.